Our speaker today is no stranger. She has been here before. Wendy Carr is a licensed Unity teacher. And she first got to Unity in Hamilton. At that time, it was Christ Church Unity Center. Now it's Unity of Greater Hamilton. But that was way back in not 1884, I almost said that. She became a licensed Unity teacher in the year 2000. And she has been very active in Unity, leading spiritual education and enrichment classes, which she will be doing here very shortly in October. And she has just accepted a posting as licensed Unity teacher representative to Unity Canada's Board of Directors. Congratulations. She's also well known for her love of frogs. That's full realization of God. That's full realization of God. Please welcome Wendy Carr.
Good morning. Happy Thanksgiving. So I have the opportunity to do a two-part series. So today we're going to talk about the Old Testament, and in 2 weeks when I'm back, we'll talk about the New Testament. And one of the themes for this month is about healing. And most people, when they think about healing in the Bible, they immediately think of Jesus, conclusion to come to. But there's more. And if Unity Kitchener didn't know it yet, I'm a Bible geek. I have the books to prove it. I have the sagging bookshelves to prove it. So let's start just getting some foundation for these two lessons. And my first question is, what does Unity teach about the Bible? That's something we don't often talk about. And I think it's in part because many of us came to Unity from other faith groups. Might have hit us over the head with the Bible a few times. And there was some healing work that I needed to do when I came into Unity around that. So I could turn to Eric Butterworth. He wrote a book called Unity, A Quest for Truth. And if you're newer to Unity, I suggest that that's a good reading material for you. And he writes, one of the greatest limitations to understanding the Bible is its insistence on its infallibility. A thing is not true just because it is in the Bible. It is in the Bible because sometime through its long evolution, certain people thought it contained material valuable in the quest for truth. Our co-founder Charles Fillmore continues with that idea, and he says, the idea that the Bible writers were equally inspired is fallacious. They were from every walk of life, and their inspirations were modified by their own mental bias as well as their surroundings. And one of our great metaphysicians, Elizabeth Sand-Turner, writes, the Bible is the story of our spiritual growth. It records how we were created. No matter how far we wander from a spiritual standard, the Bible assures us that there is always a way open to God. So let's talk a little bit about the Old Testament. I learned early on, don't read the Old Testament before you go to sleep. I had weird dreams. I had been doing some work in the book of Judges, and oh man. But one of the things that I appreciated about Unity was it gave me enough background that suddenly all of these stories started to make sense. Because it spans from a time of prehistory to the time of the Roman Empire. That's a long time. But my instructor at Unity Village taught us this. Old Testament. Obey God, you are blessed. Disobey God, guess what's going to happen? You are cursed. When I was in school, we would recite that, and we actually got to the point we had a gentleman bring his bongos in, and he would bongo along as we recited that. So it's very much in my background. But it's a striking, even back in the time of Moses, the health of the people was considered of great importance and was always mentioned in connection with their spiritual welfare. If they were obedient to the law, they kept in health. If disobedient, they fell sick. The same law that brought about these results has always been operative and is active in our midst today. Faith in God as the health of his people and obedience to the law of being brings health. Distrust and disobedience produces ill health. That's from the writings of our co-founder, Charles Fillmore. And Charles further, fundamental in being, and that health is his own divine birthright. It is the orderly state of existence, but man, woman, must learn to use the knowledge of this truth to sustain the consciousness of health. So I got thinking about, well, what is healing? What is health? And it's a lot more than I thought it was. So going around the circle, starting in the lower left corner. So healing can be reconciliation, restoration, whether it's in the Old Testament, we'll find restoration of land or restoration of a relationship, reconciliation in a relationship, reconciliation in a relationship. We have evidence of spiritual healing. We have evidence of illness, death, so physical and medical as healing. And somebody said to me, well, death can't be healing. I beg to differ. I was at the bedside of my mentoring minister when she passed from this world, and she was healed in that instant. And that was a hard one to learn, and I am grateful to her that she gave me that last lesson. We also have emotional, psychological healing. And then we have one, I hadn't really thought of this as a healing until one of my other Unity professors taught me. And he said, if you have a financial need, you need a prosperity healing. And okay, yeah, let's change my thinking around that it's not about lack, but it's an awareness that there's something that needs to be healed, something that needs to be brought forward, released, corrected, whatever it is. So when we come to the Old Testament, there are stories throughout. I'm going to focus on 2 Kings, because that's where the bulk of the stories happen, and it's easier for you to just go and read them for yourself. So I'm going to talk about the healing miracles of Elisha. But what you need to know is that Elisha was the student, the appointed one for Elijah, the prophet. And in fact, the way that Elijah picked Elisha was that he saw him and he put his mantle on his shoulders to indicate. At the time, there's a whole bunch of stories in 1 Kings. And Elijah actually parts the Jordan at one point. So Moses wasn't the only one who did that. Who knew? And after he parts the Jordan, the two of them walk across. And Elijah knows that his time is about to end. And he says to Elisha, "What would you have?" And Elisha says, "I would like a double portion of your spirit." Elijah is then taken up, he ascends, and his mantle is left behind. And Elisha takes the mantle and puts it on himself. And almost immediately, Elisha performs a miracle. He goes into town and he's told that the water is unclean. And he takes a bowl and some salt and cleanses the water. Quick, how fast he can move into that. Now I'm going to go through these rather quickly because I invite you to go to 2 Kings yourself and read it for yourself. But there are different kinds of miracles that happen and different kinds of healings. So the first one, and probably the most famous of Elijah's miracles, was the widow's oil, where she's about to have everything taken away from her, and he says, "What do you have?" And she says, "I've got some empty jars." And he pours and pours, pours, and it becomes oil that she can sell and get some money. So that's a prosperity healing. She thought that she had nothing, and yet the oil actually had to be told to stop flowing because they'd run out of jars to put it in. So that's a prosperity healing. A lot of people think of that as a prosperity healing. A lot of people think of that as a prosperity miracle, but isn't a miracle just something we don't really understand? And how many of us have seen a healing that we just don't understand? One of the biggest ones I ever saw, back in the days when Hamilton was up on the mountain, I was one of the people in the kitchen. Formed a circle, prayed over her. The next day there was no scar. So it happens. I've seen it. I can stand firm in my faith because I've had demonstrations in my own life. But back to Elisha. Also in chapter 4, he has a raising of the dead. He raises the son of the Shunammite woman. So anyone who says that Jesus is the only one who raised the dead hasn't read their Old Testament. Sorry. But again, it's very much about seeing beyond the appearances to the wholeness that lies within. Later in the chapter, he feeds 100 men. You noticing some parallels here? Then he has a healing of Naaman, and that was a leprosy kind of thing. Where have we heard that one? So there's a lot of these stories in 2 Kings where we are seeing the beginnings of the belief in the ability to have miracles, the ability to heal darn near anything. And finally, I pick in chapter 6, they are having fights with the Syrians, and they actually come to a place of reconciliation. And I think that's really important because I don't think that we understand how important it is to reconcile ourselves, whether it's with our past, whether it's with a person, whether it's to an event. But that part of our healing work is so vital. And I guess for me, thinking about it for Thanksgiving, about how to survive Thanksgiving in current political, economic situations, I'm kind of glad I wasn't invited to my cousin's because she's in the States and she's a Trump supporter. Oh, thank you. Yes, we'll pray for her. But here's the thing. It's okay. She and I don't need to be on the same page because all I need to do is reconcile my feelings about what she believes. What she believes is none of my business. Healing that part of ourselves. And in all of these stories in 2 Kings, it's about the person who is receiving the healing being healed. It's not about Elisha saying, look at what wonders I've done. It's about all of these people coming to a greater understanding about themselves, about the world, about themselves, about the world they're in, and about the divinity that exists. Now, in the Old Testament, almost forgot Charles here. Charles said, go to God first and thereafter as God directs. So if you're not feeling well and you're thinking, oh, I'd better go to the ER, no, go to God first. If God says, make yourself some chicken soup, find your favorite blanket and curl up someplace, go do it. If, however, you get the nudge again to go to the ER, get your butt over there, find someone to go with you, it's to be done. And I actually have changed the frog from full realization of God to first rely on God. And I tell you a story. When I was living in Windsor, one of our congregants was a firefighter, and he offered to teach us CPR and first aid. And this was my first time getting training in CPR. And I admit, I was very nervous. I wanted to get it perfect. I wanted to make sure that if I was called on, I would be able to save somebody. And that all dissipated when he said, the first thing you do is take a deep breath, and within yourself you say to the soul of that person, I am facilitating a way for you to come back if you want. If you wish to go, if this is your time to go, I'm fine with that. And that lifted a big burden. But this is the truth about the healing. I can't heal anybody else. I can only be a conduit for God to act through me. Perhaps what I need to do is grab a tourniquet and put it on someone who's bleeding. Perhaps I need to hold a hand of someone who's in pain. Perhaps I need to put an arm around a shoulder of someone who is grieving so deeply that they don't know who they are anymore. This is what healing is about. This is what we are seeing in the Old Testament starting to develop, because the Old Testament is all about pre-Jesus. It's all about Jesus. It's all about making the mistakes until you get that divinity perfected as the Christ within. I also like to go, being a Bible geek, to the Apocrypha, also called the Deuterocanonical books. And those fall between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And they appeared in some of the early Catholic Bibles, but not in the Hebrew Bible. So there's some discussion about whether or not they belong. I personally think they do, because I think they have a lot of wisdom in them. The book of Tobit, for example, the whole story is about someone seeking out a healing. Do it, but that's the whole underpinning of that whole book. And the book of wisdom, Sirach, chapter 38. In the New Revised Standard Version, it's subtitled, Concerning Physicians and Health. Honor physicians for their services, for the Lord created them. For their gift of healing comes from the Most High, and they are rewarded by the King. The skill of physicians makes them distinguished, and in the presence of the great, they are admired. The Lord created medicines out of the earth, and the sensible will not despise them. Was not water made sweet with a tree in order that its power might be known? And he gave skill to human beings that he might be glorified in his marvelous works. God's works will never be finished, and from him health spreads over all the earth. My child, when you are ill, do not delay, but pray to the Lord, and he will heal you. Give up your faults and direct your hands rightly, and cleanse your heart of all sin. Offer a sweet-smelling sacrifice and a memorial portion of choice flour, and pour oil on your offering, as much as you can afford. Then give the physician his place, for the Lord created him. Do not let him leave you, for you need him. There may come a time when recovery lies in the hands of physicians, for they too pray to the Lord, and he grant them success in diagnosis and in healing, for the sake of preserving life. He who sins against his Maker will be defiant towards the physician. Interesting writing. And I only found that in the last few years. So even the Apocrypha says, go to God first, and thereafter, as God directs. And thereafter, as God directs. And finally today, I leave you with this thought. The ways of answered prayer for healing are as infinite as God is infinite.
You are the face of God. I hold you in my heart. You are a part of me. You are the face of God. You are the
as we come to our time of prayer and meditation, I invite you to get comfortable in your chair, knowing that it will support you. And I ask you to allow my voice to be your voice as we join together, heart to heart, hand to hand, soul to soul, in a time of journeying together. And in this consciousness, we seek that place in ourselves where we most feel connected to the divine, whatever name we may have for that place. And deeply breathing, let us give thanks for the healing so far in our lives, but that which is just awaiting our claim. Knowing that whatever circumstances we face, whether it's a physical illness, a prosperity concern in any country, whatever it is that we see needs healing, let us just gently bring it forward to our mind and ask the question, what is mine to do? I am willing to release. I am willing to act. I am willing to be still and wait for guidance. This time we just allow those questions to flow over the concerns. And breathing, we take into mind the writing of Mary Kupferle. The ways of answered prayer for healing are as infinite as God is infinite, infinite as God is infinite. And we open ourselves to that infinite ability to heal and be healed. We allow ourselves to be aware at all times for that little nudge of what is ours to do. And we acknowledge and accept our own healing and give thanks. So it is. Amen.
I hold you in my heart. You are a part of me. You are the face of God. You are the face of God. You are the face of love. I hold you in my heart. You are my family. You
are the face of love. A great lesson, Wendy. Fabulous. Just something I could hear again and again. It's you've done a lot of work, a lot of research, a lesson, and lots to do. I know there's going to be a few people reading 2 Kings. And as you speak about being miracle-minded, you know, we all have dominion over our thoughts and feelings. And it really is a great responsibility to be aware of our thoughts and our feelings and to be miracle-minded if we choose. Just go to God first. Thank you, Wendy.